whether intentionally or unintentionally. You're talking about a technology that is separated by usually a large distance from the individual themselves. So understanding intent in real time is often very difficult.
Hi, this is Technologically Speaking, the official podcast for the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate, or S&T as we call it. Join us as we meet the science and technology experts on the front lines, keeping America safe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Technologically Speaking. I'm your host, Brittany Greco, and joining me today is Steve Willoughby, the Executive Director of the Program Executive Office for Unmanned Aircraft Systems and Counter-UAS Aircraft Systems, or UAS. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So when we talk about unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, drones, some of the words we'll be using today, this is a really big, emerging priority for DHS. Can you give us just sort of a lay of the land of why this mission space is so important for DHS right now?
Absolutely. I think it's twofold, really. Of course, drones are revolutionizing the way that businesses perform their missions. The ability to use drones for positive things, whether it's policing, public safety, carrying packages, delivering your pizza, whatever it may be, it's really revolutionizing the way that we can get products and capabilities in the hands of people across the nation. On the flip side of that, of course, with every revolutionary technology, there's also a downside from a threat perspective.
Yep.
And we want to be able to enable the use of drones within the national airspace system within the United States, but also understand the risk and threat that they pose to our missions and how they could be misused by those with criminal intent.
So CUAS, countering drone-based threats, that's something that DHS has been working on for a long time. What changed, or what's driving the creation of the new Program Executive Office?
No, that's a great question. I firmly believe that the Program Executive Office is the evolution of our ability to implement and oversee the UAS and counter-UAS missions within the department. Like many other missions, drone threats are really cross-cutting, and there needs to be a department-level group that is strategically overseeing the way we invest and implement these technologies to either help with the implementation of drones or deal with drone threats across the homeland. Mm-hmm. Doing so at the department level really helps draw down on some of those silos and duplication of effort or investment that we just can't afford to have in this portfolio. Mm-hmm. We need to have systems that are interoperable. They don't need to be the same systems, but they need to be able to talk to each other. We need to have training profiles and expertise such that our components can help each other in a very logical and structured way, right? If I'm trained as a CUAS operator, I should not have to go to another component and have it be completely foreign to me if I'm assisting them, right, which happens a lot within Homeland Security. Mm-hmm. And those are some of the internal things that we're helping to solve, but the reality is it's bigger than that. The Program Executive Office is really the central coordinating element for the interagency on behalf of our operational components. Mm-hmm. Customs and Border Protection, Secret Service, Coast Guard, Transportation Security Administration, all of them are constantly working hand in hand with the Department of War, with the FBI, with other agencies, to include state and locals. And there needs to be a belly button that is ensuring that what all of our operational components are doing is consistent and applied in a way that is a representation of the department's issue in the department's implementation in the drone and counter-drone space. Mm-hmm. That won't happen successfully without the Program Executive Office.
We hear about, we're facing new emerging threats, S&T is focused on those. What kinds of threats do we see? And we can speak generally, from drones used by malicious actors, to the nation.
I think it spans the gamut of what you can imagine from a threat perspective. You can use a drone for just about any sort of criminal activity, and not just the drone itself, but to facilitate other things that may be happening out there.
Right.
You can use the drone to surveil law enforcement activities, to harass them, monitor what Department of Homeland Security officers are doing, how they're performing it, gather intelligence, collect intellectual property on companies, on your competitors. You can also carry payloads, whether that's narcotics, other sort of contraband, across the border, into prisons, into places you're not supposed to go. And those are all intentional, malicious activities, but you also have the threat from those that are reckless or careless with drones. And if you were to fly a drone across an active runway and it collides with a plane or it gets sucked into the intake of an engine, you might have a catastrophic event that was really not malicious at all, but also something that we need to be concerned about from a public safety perspective.
Definitely. And it's, sort of agnostic to what the intent is sometimes, of just we need to understand how the technology can impact those different areas.
Absolutely. And we're talking about unmanned systems, right, which are most often detached from the human operator, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You're talking about a technology that is separated by usually a large distance from the individual themselves. So understanding intent in real time is often very difficult.
And there's got to be a huge effort to coordinate, the various people involved with this. So you mentioned, there's concerns about airports, there's concern about border security, there's concerns about, critical infrastructure installations, about, public places like stadiums. So how do you start the conversation for a big topic like this with everybody who needs to be at the table?
I try to approach it similar to what I've seen done in the manned aviation space, right? And so we think back to 9/11, of course, right? The ability to misuse a technology that you would not otherwise think could be characterized as a threat to the nation or to the people. And we've overhauled the way that we do aviation security, and we need to translate that into the unmanned space as well. Now, it's a little bit more difficult because we're not talking about huge aircraft that can be tracked very well through radar and through normal kind of air domain technologies. But the approach and the end state needs to be similar to what we have today in the manned aviation space. Basically, you need to know what's in the airspace, either through a broadcast from the drone itself, from detection technology that maybe we're using on the law enforcement or public safety side, or some sort of integrated unmanned traffic management system where we know what drones are in the airspace, whether or not they're supposed to be in a given space at any particular time, and how we can deconflict those that are authorized or approved to be in a space with those that may not be approved to be there.
And that's, since it's such an ever-changing situation, thinking about how you have to have that situational awareness across these different domains at all times. You have to have different people talking to each other. One of the big things that I know S&T has focused on in the past is how do you get those people to talk to each other?
We've been empowered and charged with solving the coordination issues, the strategic alignment and interoperability challenges that we've faced in the past. One of the largest obstacles we face is the speed at which this portfolio moves.
Yeah.
There are new technological developments in the drone space. Every 6 months, there's a new product, a new capability, a new way that the drone can maintain communications with the pilot. And all of it is really intended to help proliferate the drone space, the positive and commercial uses of drones.
Right.
But every time they make something more capable on the drone side, for good reasons, of course, threat actors can take that and use it to their advantage as well. And so the Program Executive Office is really front and center at breaking down some of the barriers, silos, obstacles that we've run into in the past, not by anybody's fault per se, within our mission space, but really just inherently in a portfolio that moves at the pace that we're talking about.
So that raises an interesting question about, when we're coordinating with these different federal agencies, what are the conversations like, and how do we make sure that we are tailoring things for a domestic, homeland security focused mission space, which is distinct.
Yes. The biggest consideration when it comes to military versus law enforcement or public safety operations is collateral effects. And when we're talking about employing unique or capable technologies in the homeland, it's not just about our ability to deal with the threat, which is, of course, the priority, but also what collateral implications are there when we're employing technologies that maybe jam certain frequencies that are closely aligned or the same as your Wi-Fi signal or your cell phone. We don't want to inherently try to target a threat or a risk to a mission and then cause more harm than good when we take that action. If I use a jamming or a spoofing technology and suddenly the police radios don't work, right? I've now caused a bigger problem than whatever the drone may have posed. And don't get me wrong, sometimes there may come a time where the collateral risks don't outweigh the threat. Right?
Sure.
If we're talking about a drone that's carrying a payload and it's flying towards a stadium with 100,000 people in it, I'll deal with the consequences of knocking out radios so long as I stop that threat. But those are the considerations that we have to take into consideration when we're talking about operating in the homeland, in the United States, amongst people in cities. Not all of our missions are in the desert or over the water.
Totally.
A lot of them are in major metropolitan areas.
And that raises a good point about who the person making that decision is at the end of the day. Because as we know, a lot of this stuff is going to be done by state and local public safety agencies who have to make split-second decisions about what's the best way to triage this problem. And so how is your office setting them up for success and empowering them to make the decision in the moment?
So historically, just to add some context here, the counter drone, the Counter-UAS mission has been performed exclusively by federal law enforcement agencies, right? So you're talking about Federal Bureau of Investigation, right? Your FBI partners, Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Secret Service, U.S. Coast Guard. All of them have critical no-fail missions within their respective areas of responsibility. However, we can't be everywhere. Right. We are federal partners. We have our very clear charters and mandates and missions to perform. Most of the state and local jurisdictions do not have a significant federal presence when it comes to protecting their areas, their facilities, their people.
Right.
It falls upon them. We are at the federal level providing oversight, guidance, and assistance when it requires support from a level of national significance, right? But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of the responsibilities fall to those state and local agencies to, again, protect their own constituents and critical infrastructure. And so as far as transitioning the responsibilities for what we've been doing historically in the Counter-UAS space to those individuals, there's actually been a significant change in legislation that occurred late last year that now affords state and local, tribal and territorial law enforcement entities, as well as correctional facilities, to be able to use this advanced detection and mitigation equipment when it comes to combating UAS or drone threats. There are some guardrails and requirements that have to be followed, including some mandates for federal partners to establish those oversight and regulatory regimes to ensure that the state and locals and our other partners are using this technology responsibly, given the potential collateral effects.
Right.
We can work with them and help guide them in a way based on the lessons that we've learned over the last 6 years and set them off with their best foot forward to be able to integrate this technology, use it in a way that's responsible, not detrimental to the other technologies that may be operating in whatever city or area they're operating in as well, and then protecting the integrity of the national airspace system to ensure that we aren't impacting other authorized or manned aviation flights that may be in the space.
And we had a wonderful conversation with Alice Hong, the director of our National Urban Security Technology Laboratory, about the resources that are available through that laboratory, through S&T, for state and locals to say, hey, we're not going to recommend you any one system in particular, but these are the things to keep in mind. And so that's, we hope that the state and local folks out there use those systems and they find it empowering to make their own decisions about these technologies. There's a big push to make sure that we're using American-made systems, that we can make sure that we account for the cybersecurity, the communications capabilities, the sort of technical hardware aspects of this technology. Can you tell us a little bit about how those conversations are going?
Absolutely. And again, getting back to what the Program Executive Office was really stood up and designed to accomplish, being driven by the administration and, of course, right, the department leadership. And there are two tracks to that, similar to the way the office is set up. First is on the drone front. We look at what the Department of War is doing with their drone dominance program and finding ways to foster domestic manufacturing and onshoring or reshoring initiatives to support that. We see that as a model for what we could potentially pursue for our public safety and law enforcement officials on the homeland security side as well. There have been significant hurdles and obstacles dealing with the domestic manufacturing and supply chain,
I'm sure,
in this space, because a lot of the components and subcomponents that go into these devices, there's no public market for them right now. There's no domestic manufacturing. There are initiatives underway to assist with that on-ramping or increase of domestic manufacturing for drones and, of course, counter-drone technologies. I would say the counter-drone or counter-UAS space is a little bit further ahead than I think the domestic drone manufacturing is. And again, that's just my personal opinion, but there is a historic precedent for bespoke technologies to deal with threats that the U.S. excels at.
Yeah.
And we have a number of allied partners that are also leading the charge in that regard. And so I think more so on the drone side, it's figuring out how we can encourage the industry and the free market to direct their attention and investment into the space, despite the smaller scale impacts that it might have in the short term, with the hopes that if we do it correctly, the long term will yield a lot of positive results.
So thinking about the federal coordination, thinking about how we make sure that everyone's aligned into sort of a vision for where we're going with these capabilities. What does that vision look like?
The topmost priority for me, for my team right now, is the events of this summer. We're talking about World Cup, the historic events associated with America 250, right? These are unprecedented events that are being hosted here in the United States, and at a time when drone threats rise to the top of people's minds when it comes to what are we doing to prepare for having 11 host cities filled with people, global travelers, all of them look to the sky and say, oh, I hope they're doing something about drones.
Like, is that supposed to be there? Like, we don't want to look up and be like, ooh.
And so working towards that as our short-term goal is top of mind. We need to continue to employ technologies and collaborate with our partners to ensure that those games, those events are the safest that they can be, and to really ensure that any threat that possibly manifests itself, whether it's through a drone or assisted by a drone, is dealt with quickly and effectively with no collateral. So how do we, in the traditional government acquisition and procurement space, keep pace with the ability to test, procure, employ new technologies to deal with this threat landscape that is ever changing and wholly dynamic? It's counterintuitive to the way we've done business in the past.
Sure.
And hopefully one of the objectives that the Program Executive Office can help lead out as far as transitioning us from these traditional methods of procuring and testing systems and getting things into the hands of the operators in a timely fashion.
And that's, again, something to be said for why S&T is, why the office is positioned in S&T, talking about testing and evaluation. And again, it's making sure that these technologies can meet the mission needs. Because these are a variety of situations, a variety of circumstances. You mentioned 11 host cities for the World Cup alone. We know the America 250 celebration is going to be taking nationwide. There are a lot of factors for folks to consider. And so being able to look to a technical expert who says, you need to make sure that your Counter-UAS, your drone system can do this. Because if I'm understanding it correctly, like the government is never going to come out and say, hey, everyone go buy this one system. It's going to be, when you're making your procurement decisions, keep these capabilities in mind. Why is that perspective important for folks to have, as opposed to here's a list of, here's your shopping list, go get these solutions?
Of course, we never want to be in the business of telling other people what particular systems to buy. Mm-hmm. However, we can provide guidance and direction as far as capabilities and capacity. What you mentioned, the research and development and the test and evaluation process, all of that is to determine on the federal side what is functional, what is performing at the right level, and to understand what the implications are of using that technology in the homeland.
I'm just struck by that tension of, the race, the ongoing, innovation.
The drone race.
Yeah, the drone race between, official use cases and people who mean to do us harm.
Absolutely. I'll just say the implementation of drones into standard business practices. Mm-hmm. We see it from drones being used for deliveries. We see it for real estate, for cinematography. There are a ton of great uses for drones. And the last thing we want to do is stifle the innovation and implementation. It is imperative that we perform our mission and secure the homeland from the misuse of drones and the reckless implementation of them, separately and distinctly from enabling the positive use of drones within the homeland. And that goes for our use of drones as well. We need to be able to fly our own drones for security reasons, to be able to go into rugged environments, whether that's in a burning building or in a desert region, some sort of mountainous area. And we need to understand that that drone that's flying there belongs to us and is supposed to be there, and to be able to target another drone that may be in the vicinity without impacting our operations that are ongoing concurrently.
Back to the World Cup and big events like America 250. If you can tell us, what have those conversations been like? How do you make sure that we're asking the right questions with enough time to make sure that people can, get the solutions they need?
The World Cup has been a catalyst for us in this portfolio. The new legislation that was achieved, through Congress late last year, is a product of them looking forward to the events of this summer and saying we need to right size the federal laws and legislation around this portfolio to ensure that we can protect these games, these events, these jurisdictions.
So how did you get to DHS? What was your journey here?
I actually started with DHS in 2011. As a transportation security officer.
Wow.
So I was part of the screening team right here at Dulles International here in DC. I applied for every position straight out of college that I qualified for. And within days of applying, I got a call from TSA to come and interview for this position. And that was really my first foray into government work and civil service. I spent nearly a decade with TSA doing a number of different missions. Aviation and transportation security is near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely.
So not surprised to end up continue working that, just in a different angle with the department. Had the opportunity to work and help stand up the counter-drone office here at the department with the previous director, who I knew from my life at TSA. I think we are the largest department when it comes to employing these technologies, some of the R&D investment that we're doing, as well as the number of trained personnel, all of which is a product of 6 years as a startup in this space. And we are more mature now with the Program Executive Office and the investment that we're making into the portfolio. But really, it still has that startup feel.
Where did you grow up?
Grew up in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale
Okay,
area.
yeah.
I think it's a pretty standard place to live in the scope of the weather is fairly predictable. There's 2 seasons, not 4. And ironically, I ended up playing hockey growing up in Florida.
No way.
You said you grew up on the beach.
Right.
What were you doing playing hockey?
Hockey in Florida.
Yeah. And so now living in D.C. for going on 16 years now, wow. It's been a blessing to have access to winter sports and snow and all of those things that you don't necessarily get in Florida. Although I do, of course, love going back and visiting and hanging out on the beach.
Steve, thank you so much for being with us here today. This was a fascinating conversation, and we're going to have to get you back to hear how things are going in the executive office.
Awesome. Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next episode.
Thank you for listening to Technologically Speaking. To learn more about what you've heard in this episode, check out the show notes on our website and follow us on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. And on social media at DHS SciTech. That's DHS SCITECH. Bye.